Welcome to Acfim Talks, yet another episode on the 22nd of April 2022. My name is Felix Kafuma, who is moderating again today's episode of Acfim Talks, and we are discussing Uganda's coffee deal. Yes, we are still at it, but this time taking another angle. Not everybody is looking at whether it's a possible Ploy trade for it called finance. And with me in the studios, I'll be joined by two gentlemen that I'll be introducing in a short while. But before I introduce them, allow me to encourage everybody out there to be part of this discussion, to join and contribute to this discussion. We are live on all our social media platforms. We are live on Facebook. We are live on Twitter. We are live also on YouTube. YouTube, it is Acfim. It is flashed below the screen, and then on Twitter handle is at Acfim UG, and then Facebook is Acfim. You can be able to participate, send in your questions, your clarifications, and also your comments as we move along. With me in the studios, I have Bernard Sabiti, who is a researcher and a public policy analyst, mainly focusing on using data to promote transparency and accountability in governance. Done a lot of work in that area. Spent 15 years studying politics of Uganda and in the Great Lakes region, and a lot of research around politics of Uganda as well. He's also an active participant in the electoral processes, contested for parliamentary seat in 2011, and has equally written extensively about Uganda's patrimonial and clientelistic politics. Bernard, you are most welcome.
Pleasure to be here, Alex. Thank you. Felix. Sorry.
Yeah, Felix. Just up your volume for the PC a little bit up so you can be a bit more clearer. And also, as our other participants joins, Henry Muguzi. Let me introduce him as he joins, gets on set. He's a regular on the show, and he's a political finance expert, also the executive director of Alliance for Finance Monitoring. Henry, when you get on set, I will officially welcome you. Like I said earlier, my name is Felix Kafuma, who's moderating today's discussion, where we are looking at the Uganda's coffee deal that has made rounds in the media, but from a different perspective, whether whatever is happening, when you double click, it's a ploy to raise political finance. Before we start, let me try to lay foundation and give this discussion direction. As you are all aware, media for the last 2 weeks, probably 2.5 weeks, has been awash with two scandals involving one Italian investor by the names of Enrica Pinetti. In both scandals, Pinetti and government is in courts here, are in bed, quote unquote, conniving to fleece taxpayers in one way or another. The first controversial deal involving Pinetti is that one that gives her, under the auspices of Uganda Vinci Coffee Company, monopolistic or near to monopolistic status in trading and exporting for the next 10 years. This comes on top with the extravagant tax waivers, and this definitely has sparked a lot of public debate and outrage. But also, this scandal has resurrected the scam project involving the same player, Pinetti, in establishing a specialized children's hospital at Lubowa, which is valued at around 1.4 trillion. Now, to give this justice, let me also provide a bit of a timeline here. In 2015, Pinetti is reported to have supported the NRM, that is the National Resistance Movement political party, by mobilizing resources from Rome to defeat the ex-premier Amama Mbabazi, who had expressed to stand against his former party and also former boss, General Yoweri Museveni Kaguta. Then in 2016 elections. Fast forward in 2019, Pinetti is awarded a lucrative deal to establish a specialized children's hospital at Lubowa, which a year later in 2020, the first tranche of the money for the project was released. Again, if you are connecting the dots, This was a year to the 2021 general elections. Fast forward 2022, we are now the country is debating yet another suspicious deal. Again, now it's the coffee deal involving the same person, Pinetti, but this time it's 3 years ahead of 2026. So there is an allegory that opines probably that the controversial Pinetti deals could be avenues for raising political finance. This and much more is what we are discussing today. Henry, you're welcome once again, and Bernard, you're also welcome. Now, with that, and direction of the debate, let me start with Bernard. Bernard, there is an argument that there is a direct link between how parties that have overstayed in power govern and also how they raise their political finance. KANU, which is Kenya African National Union, KANU. When you look at Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front, ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. When you look at Chama cha Mapinduzi in our neighborhood here in Tanzania. Also, when you look at the African National Congress, ANC in South Africa, there seems to be a common denominator. Also, if now let's bring in NRM here, especially on how all these parties have found themselves somehow culpable of funding political parties, their political parties using public resources. What's your take in view of what's happening?
Thank you, Felix. I really think that before I even answer your question directly, I want to talk about three key issues by definition before I go ahead to tackle your question. Number one, I think your viewers would be interested in understanding something that is called a hybrid regime. Now, hybrid regimes have increasingly become commonplace in sub-Saharan Africa. And by definition, these are governments that cannot be categorized as completely autocratic, but neither can they be regarded as completely democratic. So they are neither democracies nor complete dictatorship. That's number one. And in many developing countries, these kind of governments have increased over the last years. So these are countries where there is some semblance of democratic practice. They hold regular elections. There is an element of a free press, but they are really not democratic. So those democratic principles are choreographed in such enough of them to qualify them for full democracies. So they create a facade of democracies, but when they are not actually democracies. Uganda is a hybrid regime. It's basically a picture-perfect example of what a hybrid regime is. The second point I wanted to talk about is something we call a shadow state. There is a research recently that was conducted by Professor Nick Chisman and a few of his colleagues about how shadow states operate, especially in the African context. Now, a shadow state is a kind of loose network, informal network of actors within a government that wield enormous power, but actually hold no official positions and are not accountable or are not answerable to any official accountability institutions. In many cases, a shadow state, some people call it a deep state, also exists almost in every country around the world. It's just the scale that differs. Even in very rich countries like the United States, as you know, like Trump was always talking about the swamp or these people that are undermining the government. Well, some of it was of course, political speak, but not all of it was. Indeed, there are some powerful individuals everywhere. The problem of having a dominant shadow state in a poor country like Uganda is that the impact of such a shadow state is more devastating than if it was happening in a rich country. Because the poor country have very few resources that are available for the population. And so if you have just a loose informal network of people who manage to capture a significant chunk of those resources, there's very little left for the population. So that is why shadow states are more dangerous to poor countries than they might be for more advanced countries. The third and final point then I want to talk about is how politics or politicking is financed in regimes with the characteristics I've just talked about. Because precisely there is no clear way in which institutions can hold to account those shadowy forces that wield enormous power, then you have a marketplace of politics where the advantages enormously go to a small cabal of people that make decisions in a country. And so, because it is always very difficult to distinguish between the ruling party, for example, and the state itself, the ruling party is so entrenched within the statecraft that there is even no way where you can, with empirical evidence, start to interrogate, for example, trying to understand the source of money and resources for these ruling parties. You do a very important work trying to track financing for political activity, but it's very difficult in a shadow state or in a hybrid regime. Because, for example, unlike in the US where the Federal Elections Commission will make sure that all political contributions are tracked, there is no such a thing in a hybrid regime. And therefore, in order to really understand how ruling governments in this region marshal resources to spend in their elections or in their quest to maintain power, you have to be creative. You have to look at the scenarios. You have to imagine proxy indicators of how money that end up in elections is raised by looking at things that happen in other elements of the economy in order to try to come up with a flow of explanation on what is happening. Now, having now explained those three issues, let me come back to your question. There is no doubt whatsoever that ruling governments in Africa have a habit, I am afraid, of infusing the state with the political elements of statecraft. The reason they do that is because if they were to separate those two, then they would almost be subjected to a more fair operating ground with their opponents. It means the NRM would have to raise money the way the FDC does. It would mean that they would have to quote memberships of citizens that align with them democratically or ideologically to contribute to them. This is how democracy works in more advanced countries. You have members of a party contributing to a party to keep it afloat. In most hybrid regimes, it's the other way around. It is the party that has to keep citizens or voters as clients, which is why I mentioned something about clientelistic politics. So basically, you do not have supporters of political parties here. You have subjects. You have subjects of the ruling parties. Therefore, the ruling party has to make sure that it maximizes total control of all sorts of resources in a country in order to maintain its advantage over any possible opposition it might face. And therefore, that is why many major sectors of the economy have to be under total control of either the ruling parties directly or those informal networks I told you about that are answerable to some key principles in the ruling party. So this is how our ruling party works. It's how many ruling parties across sub-Saharan Africa work. And unfortunately, I do not see that can change, even if the current opposition were to gain power. Because of this political culture, that is not likely to change. Because we have some countries in this region, in Africa, that are a bit more democratic, where actually power changes hands. Look at Ghana, look at Kenya. But basically, it's after the 2 terms of one cabal replaced by another cabal that behaves the same way, because it's basically the political culture. So it's not far-fetched to say that some of the deal making that we have been seeing in this country is absolutely connected to politics, to politicking, and the desire to maintain power and get resources to invest in the craft of winning elections.
Thank you so much.
Back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bernard. You really laid a very good foundation. Henry, let me bring you in here to weigh in on the matter. Bernard just explains the deep state and the hybrid regime, looking at across the regions, especially looking at across Africa, but also looking at at states that have had political parties almost since independence that are dominant. Do you agree with the narrative that is being peddled that probably there's a linkage between deep state regimes and overseeing power of the finance their?
Thank you, Felix. And I hope my internet connection is stable, because often it is not.
It is.
Let me also thank Bernard for having discussed so diligently about the state and the description of the pattern we have in place. Now, let me say that the one thing he did not add is that whereas we have a hybrid pattern in place, it has more doses of authoritarianism than the other side. Now, but in the same trajectory, allow me to further to take this discussion, Sabit has just started, further a notch higher. For those political parties to stay in power, two things must happen. Number one, they must provide room for political enhancement, like the major protagonists within the parties should be able to see opportunities for them to rise to power. This is what has helped ANC, that when Mandela leaves, they know that a certain Mbeki will rise up. Mbeki leaves, then Zuma, now we have Cyril Ramaphosa, and many others shall come. When you come nearer to Tanzania, it is the same thing CCM is doing. I think Mwalimu Nyerere saw this much earlier, and he said for the survival of CCM, there must be room for political enhancement. But if you look at political parties such as NRM and ZANU-PF just collapsed out under that, because the character of Bob Mugabe was one that was domineering and closing that space. And of course, as it came to pass, the system ate him. Now, coming back home here, the spaces for political advancement have been closed, because the truth must be told. The only person that must read the party here is General Museveni, right? Now, in situations like those, the literature available says that then you must open up economic spaces and provide opportunities for economic advancement. This is what has just happened here, that the regime has opened up spaces for economic advancement. And that's why today you are able to speak about issues such as mafiaism, that there's a group, and my brother called it a cabal that went and fought, and suddenly, by click of the date, in 1986, 26th January, upwards, they became rich men, because they then took possession of properties. in all forms, sizes, and shapes. And then they have become very rich men. So for you to provide for economic advancement, then you have to build a very orchestrated and well choreographed patronage system, which is what we are seeing in place. Now, in regimes where political advancement is closed and therefore the powers of economic and therefore economic advancement has to prevail, such as we saw it in Kanu when Ndugu Moi was in charge. He opened up spaces, and when he opened up spaces, then all hell breaks loose, which is why it is not uncommon to see, and you will recall that scandal, which has been so well written about and is so spoken about, the Goldberg scandal, had to emerge. Because these regimes need money for survival. The only thing you need for survival is not by you mutating, by changing leadership, but using economics and the finances to survive. Scandals like those that happened, like I think it is Goldberg that was the final straw in the regime of Moi. When you come back home here, but maybe even before you come home, let me give another general picture. The parties, whether it is Latin America, whether it is Eastern Asia, whether it is Africa, that have managed to entrench themselves in power and successfully pursue the enterprise of regime survival, because in the trajectory of economics and economic advancement, economic survival ceases to be the main thing, and it becomes now an enterprise. An enterprise in a manner that the people the people around the man in power, the ones who call the do-wellers, and some people call them the cronies of the regime, okay? They get to enjoy these benefits and are able to access financial benefits. And then they can be diverted and they can keep the regime in office. Now, in those political parties that are in power and want to entrench themselves, like the NRM is doing now, these are some of the avenues through which they raise money. Number one, misuse of public resources. Like the national budget becomes a tool for regime survival, okay? But in a situation where you've just come out of the COVID situation, you have to be careful. Because if you're not careful at tampering and tinkering with the budget to divert resources for political finance, you are likely to hit a dead end. And when the economy collapses, you cannot survive. Authoritarian regimes, in this case a hybrid regime, must thrive in an economy that is also thriving. Number two, they tend to employ incompetent cadres to manage key state institutions, that when push comes to shove, they will either defend it as if their life depends on it, or they'll keep quiet. That is what they do. Or at a time when they need resources to be diverted and pushed through shoddily and shadowy deals, such as the one we are seeing with the Pineti in Lubowa, that they will come good. Number three, patronage appointments. You just heard the man, he told you I have appointed fishermen. Let me say this. My brother Ramadan Govi used to be an academic. He's a well-learned man, quite articulate, and used to be quite objective. He knows that he was not qualified to be the permanent secretary. As a matter of fact, he had been tipped to be the Minister of Finance. Now, and when there was a kind of a hoax of an appointment list, he had already started saying, thank you for wishing me well, but he didn't come to be. He knows that there is a well laid out hierarchy that specifies who gets to become permanent secretary. We have an undersecretary in the Ministry of Finance who resigned and said, I cannot work under this man. So this is what regimes do. But there is a reason for appointing such characters, that they will know by themselves that they were not suited. Therefore, the only way they can guarantee their survival in those positions is to make sure that they become accomplices to the regime survival enterprise and support and defend deals such as this one. Number 3, issues of voter inducement. They must pay to survive. That's why you see people being paid to cross over from one party to the other. Number 5, they engage in quid pro quo arrangements. Look, you support us in the elections 2011, we give you Mulago land. You support us in this one, we give you Kingdom House, Kingdom Hall. You misbehave here, we take our Ukraine Bank. You see, this is how they behave. And they use these as tools for their survival. Now, there are so many other things that can go on and on and on and on. So for the survival of these regimes, deals must be perpetuated. Deals must be perpetuated to raise money for the political activities and election campaigns. Now, you can ask yourself a question, but 2026 is 3 years away. Whereas we are sure that Rubawa happened in 2020. And of course, they're asking Pinette, where did the money go? She doesn't know. Of course, you and I can second guess where the money went, because the money who pushed so badly that she should be financed in time is now silent, as if he knew where the money went. But that's for another day. So they must, in the case of now, what we are seeing with the coffee, I think they've just decided that it is important to stagger these regime survival deals, so that if you stagger them over a period of 3 years, then the impact on the economy can kind of be managed. This is what I think. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Henry, for you know, I am laughing is because I want to first pick it up from the scandals that happened in our neighborhood here. The 1991-93 scandal of the Golden Bag, which draws in Moi, Moi. But even before then later on we had the Anglo leasing scandal by Kibaki government around 2005. And some reports do indicate that actually that money ended up financing Kibaki's electoral bid. And let me bring in here, Bernard, because do you see a similarity between the case of Kenya, those 2 scandals, and the case of Uganda and the Lubowa Children's Specialized Hospital scandal? Can we read trends, similarities in these 2 scandals between the 2 countries? Unmute.
Yes, I don't know. You are breaking off, so I didn't really hear the question quite well. Looks like the internet that side may not be quite strong. Yeah.
Okay. My question was, and I was taking it from the 2 scandals which Henry talked about briefly that happened in Kenya here. When you look at those 2 scandals, the Golden Bag scandal, where Moi was the center of it, towards the tail end of his tenure, and also when you look at the Anglo leasing scandal, where Kibaki was at the center, and actually some literature does point to the Anglo leasing scandal, where Kibaki was the center. Some of that money having ended up financing Kibaki's presidential bid. Now, when you look at those 2 scandals in Kenya, do you read some similarities between these 2 scandals in Uganda involving the same person, Benetti? One, the coffee deal, but also looking at the Lubowa Children's Specialized Hospital, and also looking at the timing and our electoral calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. I see parallels between the 2. And as I said in the beginning, this is a very common practice in most of this part of the world. It's the scale that differs. Because I think some of those deals in Kenya were so big that they constituted a significant chunk of their entire economy. It was quite astonishing. And this is where we are headed. I do not I won't be surprised if the next phase in this kind of bonanza is going to be like having the whole private sector education, for example, given to somebody to run all the schools or to run all the hospitals. This is where we are headed. And the more these regimes stay in power, the more it becomes costly to maintain being in power. Because I did some analysis a couple of years ago, looking at how much it cost, for example, to win a parliamentary election in 1996, compared to what it is today, and even factoring in inflation and all that. The difference is just astronomical. It tells you that every 5-year cycle that we have, this system that we have, it is very, very costly for the regime to keep its power, because the opposition increases. And the more opposition increases, the more the survival skills of the regime has also to change and increase. And so what we have is a scenario that I think in the last election, we had some MPs in certain constituencies who had to spend up to a tune of $500 million Uganda shillings to win a parliamentary seat of probably 40,000 voters. Now you imagine a scenario like that. And then when you go to presidential level, you imagine the colossal amounts of money that have to be spent either to buy off the opposition or some elements of it, or to even induce support from even those who already support the government. Because the government cannot take any support for granted really here. As I told you in the beginning, as opposed to real democracies, especially in the West, where supporters fund the political parties, in our part of the world, it's the other way around. And therefore, the moment the cost of maintaining power increases, there will always be a corresponding increase in the machinations that the regime will use in order to raise the finance it needs to keep in power. So for those that are outraged about the coffee deal and the Ruboa, these are going to look like small pet projects compared to what is coming. And what Henry said in the beginning, that our case is extreme, even when compared to the region, by the way. We do not have in the region a country where a president has been in power for 37 years. I think currently in Africa, we have only one person, that is in Cameroon, that has spent longer than our president in power. And so the more you have a system like that, where basically, and by the way, again, I've done research comparing even how Parliament was working at the turn of the first 5 years. Like if you look at the 6th Parliament, the 96 to 2001 Parliament, if you looked closer at the decisions that Parliament made, how strong and quite independent that institution was, and then compared to subsequent parliaments, it shows you that every 5 years there is a worsening, a regression in terms of the grip the regime is having on institutions. We successfully censured two ministers, actually, I think in the 6th Parliament. The minister then, Sam Kutesa, was, I think, a minister for finance. And then there's a time we forced some others to step aside during the Gavi scandal. And can you imagine the current parliament is successfully censuring a minister? Can you even put it in your head? It's simply can't happen. Because why? The way the parliament is constituted right now is your 3/4 ruling party. Every village has been made into a constituency, of course, calculated to benefit the ruling party. So now the parliament has a body that can check the excesses of the executive. There's nothing like that anymore. So that's why you have a scenario where legislation is retrospectively done, the process to sanitize a future deal. Look at this coffee thing that we did. So now people are connecting the dots. So that coffee bill that was discussed was a very well calculated event in a series of events to prepare for this deal. The withdrawal from the International Coffee Agreement, the International Coffee Organization, which is a global body with best practices that has best international standards, where you can imagine if this deal would find serious problems if we were still in the ICO. So we had to withdraw as well. People were just wondering, why are we doing this? And now all the dots are connected. So to answer your question again, I really believe that it's a matter of time, and we are going to reach to a point where the scale of these scandals is going to be too big that these deals and machinations actually will be a threat to the survival of the state itself. The adage, the saying that something falling on its own weight. This is a scenario that might happen one day because someone will overplay their hand, because most of the sane people that were in the government are either increasingly being dropped, some are dying. So there is basically we have very, very little, very less intellectualism left in the NRM. The few that are there cannot dare say anything. The intelligentsia that was represented by the likes of Tumusime Mutebire, the likes of the Elia Kategayas, these were peers of our head of state who could dare to even say anything in his presence. Now, what you have left are sycophants who are just looking towards the next meal. They are not going to say anything. So we are reaching a point like where Russia is, where even the generals are very scared of telling him what's going wrong on the front line, and he has no idea. So it's very possible that a leader, as strong as he might look on the outside, actually is clueless on what is going on because of the people that surround him. So you had that decision, for example, in 2011 to print money to buy elections, and the crazy inflation that followed that triggered the walk-to-work protests. How can we know that someone is not going to make a foolish decision? Because I consider this one on coffee actually very close. This is a sector that touches on an enormous percentage of ordinary people. And trust you me, the NRM still cares, at least Mr. Museveni cares about how these poor countryside folks look at him, because he still sells himself as an advocate for the little man in the village. But now you are going to a family 70 years old whose coffee now you have ring fenced to some shadowy business, and they are not going to be able to have a voice in the marketplace. The law actually is saying now that there's all this registration going on. It's almost the cash crop laws of the colonial era, where you will even be mandated to plant a certain way and to produce a certain tonnage and acreage. It's going to be terrible to ordinary people. And this is why now the ramifications, for those who care to listen in the system, they need to be careful. Because in many cases, these scandals, when they remain at the very top, at the macro level, ordinary people normally don't care, because these things don't make sense for ordinary people. It's us who read the books, or who read the papers, or who understand these things that are always concerned. And unless it hits the wallet of a local person, in many cases, they don't care. Because when you mention that $1 billion has been stolen, for a person who is not in a money economy, they can't even conceive how much $1 billion shillings is. It's way beyond their scope of conceptualization. But now, once they start seeing the reverberating effects of these decisions on the kitchen table, then this is what you hear in these countries where things have gone wrong, where basically things go out of control and people now explode. Tunisia was a complete shadow state. Ben Ali and his family, I think at one of the stats I read, controlled up to 70% of the telecoms of the.
We need to go for a break, Bernard. So as you make a conclusion on that one.
I hope that really some sane voices can prevail so that the scenario you are talking about, we don't get there, where a whole economy is basically mortgaged to the detriment of the citizenry.
All right, thank you so much. We're going for a short break, and when we return, we will then question whether indeed the big man doesn't know what's happening or is not in charge, or probably the deep state is actually at play, where he's also part of the deep state. We'll be back.
Welcome, my people. A cup of coffee, please. There is tea, everything, the snacks are on the way.
Yeah, thanks, but the reason that's why we are here, our people need different services. We at least need an ambulance at every center.
My sub-county is the forest. We used to depend on the former MP's vehicle, but when he lost his elections, he took away his vehicle.
Of course.
So what does that mean?
Use your budget as a district to procure the ambulances.
If I could, I would. But unfortunately, government operates differently.
I'm saying, Chairperson, this is very serious and urgent.
Yes, I know. And why are they called local leaders then?
Local government.
You people, who sent you here?
I know, of course. We are concerned citizens who are watching people dying every day.
We've lost our beloved ones just because of poor health services.
Something has to be done.
You are right. Something has to be done, and very fast.
Yes.
That's transport for you. Go back.
But
All your concerns are taken care of. I will handle.
But
Have a
Chairman,
safe journey.
Thank you so much.
but this man seems to undermine our cause as to why we're here.
No, don't misunderstand me. This is just transport, no strings attached.
Chairman, we came here to discuss and find solution to our problems. But it seems you don't want to engage with us. Let's go and mobilize people, and you'll see how serious we are.
Good citizens, let us always hold our leaders accountable. Leadership is a service, not a privilege.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate.
You're still watching Acfim Talks. We're discussing Uganda's coffee deal within the context of whether this is one of those many controversial deals through which the ruling party is raising political finance. And with me, I have Bernard Sabiti, and also I have Henry Mbuzi making a good case here. Before I went for a break, Bernard was making a point where I want to bring in here, Henry. Can anyone believe or distance the president from such a deal? For example, or for instance, we all know, and probably Henry might be the best person here to share with the public that I think there are reports where the president was advised against awarding the contract of Lubowa, the controversial contract of Lubowa to Pineti in terms of establishing a specialized children's hospital. I think the advice he overruled, and we now know where the project is at. Can we say, and as all this the public outrage is raging on. The president is quiet. He hasn't come out publicly to talk about it or say anything. Could we be barking at the wrong tree? What is it we are missing?
Thank you, Felix. Let me start by stating again, generally, because the situation we find ourselves in as Uganda is a situation many other African countries find themselves in, including our neighbors, Kenyans, but they are trying to overcome it. In situations like this, there will always be some very organized, systematic, but fraudulent schemes that will be designed to fleece government for the purposes of getting resources or picking up those proceeds to finance politics and election campaigns, including the activities of the political party in power. Now, having said that, what happened in Kenya, and I was sharing this with my good friend John Gisongo, at the time of the Kibaki government, he was the man that was charged with the responsibility of denuding Kenya of corruption, purging of Kenya of corruption. He took note of this deal and refused to sanction it. He told me that, my brother, 2 years to the campaign, I was inundated by officers from the NAC government who were threatening me, and they were saying I was compromising the future of the regime in power. Because and they told him straight on that, you see, this scheme, Anglo-leasing, was supposed to provide the resources for the NAC party, but also to help the candidates under NAC to campaign. And the African way of campaigning is by providing gifts, donations, to make yourself come across as a person to whom money is not a problem. This is what Anglo-leasing was about, where you find that sums of money were released. Now, a similar one, the Golden Bag scandal that we talked about, was also one where billions, the Central Bank of Kenya paid out billions of money for gold, because Gold Bank had been set up ostensibly, understandably, to import gold and resell so that the government of Kenya can make a profit. So you can tell, import gold, you don't produce gold, import it, you become a middleman. Government, your responsibility is not to engage in middleman activities. The Central Bank of Kenya paid for up to $1 billion in gold that was never supplied. In short, it was air supply. We come back here. We do know for a fact, and that in 2019, as the enterprise of Pineti was being fronted to set up a specialized hospital in Lubowa, one of the officers in URA, actually the commissioner deployed one of the officers below him to go and conduct due diligence on Pineti. This is what he found. Number one, even the company she was purporting to be managing in Dubai, when they went there, they found it was dealing in furniture. So at best, Pineti should have been contracted to supply furniture to the hospital. And then there was no record of her paying taxes anywhere. So as a taxpayer, she had no record. So this information was shared with the president. The commissioner that came up with this information was verified. In the end, he denied that he had commissioned the junior to do the research. The fellow resigned from URA. As we speak, he's not there. These records are there. You know who resigned because he refused to take his recommendation. Now, you asked a question, why is the head of state distancing himself from this deal? We do know that at a time there was hesitation in the ministry to sign off this deal. There is a letter, 2-sentence letter, that was written to the Minister of Finance, I cannot.
Oh, wow. Did, did we, was this by design? Henry, we lost you at a point in time when you are really making a very interesting point. I hope Henry gets back online because on call, because there's some interesting information Henry was diverging concerning the latest, the exchanges between the deal, the Pinetti deal of the Specialized Children's Hospital and the head of state, his involvement in this whole incident, so that we can now make sense of why he's not necessarily coming out publicly to make comments on it. But as Henry gets back online, probably let me bring in here Bernard. I don't know, Bernard, whether you've been following the discussions on the sidelines, and I'll throw the same questions to you. It's quite unusual that the president is quiet. Okay, Henry is back. Henry, can you proceed?
So the point I was finishing is this. The president writes that 2-sentence letter and gives strong direction for the ministry to act quickly. That is when the monies were disbursed. Now remember, the lady Pinetti with Rubowa was supposed to use the resources that were provided by the Acfim Bank and Absa Bank. These resources were backed by promissory notes from government. Those promissory notes were to guarantee the banks that government will pay if she fails, but the initial money was supposed to come from those banks. And she was supposed to have financed those promissory notes only after achieving certain milestones. As we understand it today, Pinetti went and withdrew money from the bank, Acfim Bank and Absa, but at the same time, she cashed the promissory notes almost in the same time. Now, you have to ask the question, why is the silence? If the president came up and wrote this letter, why at this time is he keeping quiet? We don't know, we can only guess. Some of the guesses we can make is that perhaps he knows where the money went, and he doesn't want now to come down hard on Pinetti. Because any head of state worth his title and one that wants to guerrilla market himself as a voice of the oppressed, the voice of the poor, should be able to come up and say, this is where the resources are gone. So until he comes out to pronounce himself, I think we can only read between lines, but I think he may have a clue where the money went. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you so much, Henry. When you went off, I thought probably a drone had passed over and disconnected you specifically, but I think it was a genuine internet connection problem. Let me come to you, Bernard. You've had Henry trying to answer why the loud silence of the president, but it probably may weigh in on that one. But my question to you is more about, for the last 2 weeks, I think it's until last week or the other week, when there's so much information coming out initially that ideally, I think the framers of this contract of coffee, the controversial coffee project with Pinetti, initially they didn't want a lot of information. You would get it. In fact, many of us, including some ministries that are ideally would have been part of the process, got to know about this in the news. But of late, we are seeing a lot of leak information. There seems to be an individual internally leaking information. Is this some form of a subterfuge within the system? And if so, why now? Why do we have leakages of such deals at this point in time?
You know, Felix, there is a saying, I don't know if it is by the Chinese, that there is no honor among thieves. The thieves at the end of the day tear each other apart. I think you've seen it even in the animal kingdom. It's a common practice. When two hyenas, first they work together to put down an animal to get a carcass together, but once they have secured it, then they start fighting amongst themselves. And obviously, some of them will end up being disappointed that they didn't get their share. And so I'm not surprised at all that someone went out and leaked this information. But also, maybe before I continue on that, Henry talked about something quite interesting. And you asked the question, how is it really possible the president does not know what's going on? I find it implausible. There is this concept in law that they call plausible deniability. Among the organizational hierarchies where a lot of wrongdoing happens, the seniors or the chiefs up the hierarchical chain, it is always going to be difficult to pinpoint to them that they were responsible for any wrongdoing or that they were aware of any wrongdoing. Because like you gave that example of that poor URA commissioner, junior commissioner, who went and did due diligence according to the law and did the right thing, is the one who took the fall, not the seniors. So in many of these deals, actually, it is extremely difficult to pin the big person because they are very smart and the people around them are very smart about how they operate. Now, for the issue around, these deals are always, as I said, when something that colossal, that big, involving such amounts of money, it is almost a given. It's almost a must that somebody will be stabbed in the back, that not all the hyenas are going to share equally. And therefore, the frustrated ones are going to always cause problems. That is why there is a lot of violence in the mafia world, because in their attempt to literally eliminate any leakage, they leave a very, very big trail of, for them, they kill, as you know, in order to just eliminate any leakages. But in this case, I really believe, when I looked at the tweet that the Honorable Tumwebaze put out there, just stating that in case anyone was wondering, by the way, the Minister of Agriculture had no part in this. It was almost that these were written words, but they were almost shouting voices. You could almost smell the frustration. How can a line minister not be aware of such a colossal deal directly falling under his ministry? You can clearly see that even within the system, there is no transparency even amongst themselves. Even if it's in the wrongdoing, they are not honest with each other. And they do that intentionally because you see, these shadow states, the way they operate, there has to be a clique within a clique. There is a way Mobutu Sese Seko used to run his intelligence. Normally, the person who used to report to him had at least 3 other people spying on this person. And those 3 also had another layer of intelligence operatives reporting on them and independently going to report to Mobutu. That's how he managed to stay so long in power. So if you have institutions that are working where everyone is doing their job, that's not very good for dictatorships. These institutions are actually not supposed to work. If they work, it's bad news for the regime. So it is completely as it is supposed to be. When you see a lot of incompetence, it's actually not true that we don't have smart people. But they are put there not to be effective. It's literally how the system is designed. So that is why, for some, of course, you see the human mind and the human condition has this stubborn thing called the conscience. I really believe even among those thieves, there has to be some of them really who reach a point and say, what? Some of them can't even sleep, they are haunted. You see, you cannot really steal money for poor people for all these years. There are those whose conscience is so stubborn that it defeats them, and they have to do something or leak the information or do something just to relieve themselves so that they can sleep. This is what is happening here. You get it? Someone may not have the guts to say no because that might get them killed, but because that guilty conscience will keep bugging them, some of them end up doing the right thing. And they say, you know what, I cannot put myself out there in the public, but at least I can do something to expose this rot. I truly believe this is what happened here, because there is no other way the public could have known unless someone leaked that information. So, and this is why those insiders now must be terrified. Who did it? I believe they are looking for him or her. And whether they find him or her or not, I don't know. But whoever did this did a great public.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bernard. There was a comment from Edika in that the state has lost control of trade and business sector, trade and business policy. The trade policy is being managed by the traders on behalf of the state. All right. Our time is fast spent, and I think I have a couple of 10 minutes just to wrap this up. Anyway, let me come to you. So where do we go from here? It's out there in the public. Parliament is investigating. We all know sometimes how it ends. The head of state is mute. Are we as a country, where do we go from here?
So from here, it's important to go back to the Constitution and get to understand who we are. If we call ourselves citizens, there are those duties that are bestowed, that are conferred upon us by virtue of us being citizens. One of them is to hold accountable the people that we voted for. And by the way, there's also something called electoral accountability. That if you feel you are getting a road deal, you wait for them in the basin, including the basin for them for everybody that you think has not served you. Let me also try to qualify the comment from Mr. Edika Yinda. I think that trade has not been left to traders, because traders, in all rights, have been sidelined. I think instead of traders, he wanted to type mafias, because that's what we are seeing. Because if that was the issue, the Ministry of Trade should have been contacted. But I think also Ugandans have to reflect, and this is the last one I'm making, reflect very deeply. If the president wanted the government to be functional, he would have appointed people that would make it functional. He chose to appoint what he called fishermen. Institutions, he has appointed leaders in those institutions who cannot deliver. Maybe they could deliver, but those that can be captured and can be used as puppets and paper tigers. Is this the kind of regime we want to have? Again, the power is in your hands as citizens. You decide what to do. Ours is to give you information. Yours is to decide and take action.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Henry. Interesting. Institutions are not supposed to work. Let me come to you, Bernard. Your parting shots. You have the last word on this one.
Yeah, actually, for me, I always look at the sunny side of things, and as painful as this episode is, as is always the similar episodes of mismanagement of the state, it also gives me hope. Looking at the outrage of public and the kind of active engagement the public has on this issue, it tells me something that actually the citizenry is alert, and that as much as some bad things and bad decisions are being made, there is actually still people out there who believe that this is wrong and are willing to speak up. I've been listening to talk show radio ever since this happened, and listening to people calling from villages somewhere in Kayunga, in where, and you can clearly see that there is some very, very high interest of citizens in affairs that concern them. This is important. There are countries where this does not happen. I'm telling you, there are countries where a scandal like this would just be business as usual and everybody will move on. It seems to me, though, that if there is anything that can come out of this episode, is that at least the powers that be can know that there is a limit to how much they can go in mortgaging the state. And my hope really is that somebody in there will realize that there is a limit to that. And if we get that as one of the outcomes of the whole saga, I believe it will not all be lost. And the citizens should just be encouraged to keep speaking out and holding power to account, because this is the reason we have citizenship of this country. It's to partake in its governance, and I think this is what we are trying to do.
Thank you so much. There you have it. That was Bernard Sabit, who is a researcher and a public policy analyst. He also contested in 2011 in the elections, and he has written extensively about Uganda's patrimonial and principal.
And lost, you want to add that so that you are listening.
In Uganda, you don't lose. They rig you out of the race. But since you say you lost, probably for you, you genuinely lost. And also with me, I had Henry Muguzi, who is a political finance expert and also the current executive director of Alliance for Finance. It's been great having you in today's edition of Acfim Talks. And we were discussing Uganda's coffee deal within the perspective of whether it's a ploy to raise political finance. My name is Felix. Till next week. Bye-bye. Take care. God bless.